Lemaricus Davidson has spent over 15 years on death row for what prosecutors called one of the most incredibly outrageous, cruel and inhumane cases a court has ever seen. The Knoxville carjacking turned torture murders of Channon Christian and Christopher Newsom shocked America in 2007, exposing the darkest capabilities of human cruelty. The Chipman Street murders became one of Tennessee's most disturbing criminal cases, raising profound questions about evil, justice, and whether the death penalty truly serves as the ultimate punishment it claims to be. Before we dive into this deeply disturbing case, hit that like button and subscribe to be part of our growing community. January 6, 2007, Knoxville, Tennessee, a Saturday night that should have been filled with laughter, friends, and young love. Instead, it became the beginning of a nightmare that would haunt a community forever. Channon Christian was 21 years old, bright, ambitious, with her whole life stretching out before her like an unwritten book. A sociology major at the University of Tennessee, she was just months away from graduating in December 2007. She came from a loving family who had moved from Louisiana to Tennessee when Channon was 12. Her father, Gary Christian, would later describe her as his baby, the daughter he would never walk down the aisle, the mother of grandchildren he would never hold. Christopher Newsom Jr., 23, was her boyfriend. A former high school baseball player turned carpenter, Chris had the kind of smile that lit up a room. He'd graduated from Halls High School in 2002, where he'd been a standout athlete. He was building a life, building a future, literally and figuratively. That evening, they had plans, simple plans, dinner together, then a party at a friend's apartment. Channon went ahead to get ready, and Chris was supposed to pick her up around 8 p.m. Security cameras and witness statements would later piece together their final moments of normalcy. Standing together in the apartment complex parking lot, Chris's arms around Channon, two young people in love, completely unaware that they were being watched. Predators were circling. To understand the monster, we must first understand the man. Lemaricus Devall Davidson was born on June 13, 1981, in Memphis, Tennessee. But unlike Channon and Chris, Davidson's story doesn't begin with baseball games and family dinners. According to accounts from those who knew him, Davidson's childhood was marked by absence and addiction. His father wasn't in the picture. His mother struggled with crack cocaine addiction, leaving young Lemaricus to navigate a world that showed him very little love. Now, here's where it gets complicated, and I want you to really think about this. Does a broken childhood excuse evil? Can we separate the trauma from the crime? Drop your thoughts in the comments, because this is where true crime gets uncomfortable. By his early 20s, Davidson had already carved out a reputation in Memphis's criminal underworld. Aggravated robbery, carjacking, violence was his language, intimidation his currency. In 2003 and 2004, he served time in West Tennessee for aggravated robbery. Then came another conviction, 5 years in prison for carjacking and aggravated robbery. Here's the chilling part. Davidson was released from that 5-year sentence in August 2006. Just 5 months before he would orchestrate one of Tennessee's most horrific crimes. 5 months. The system had just released him back into society, and the clock was already ticking toward tragedy. By January 2007, Davidson had moved to Knoxville, where he was renting a small house at 2316 Chipman Street. The neighborhood was rough, the kind of place where people minded their own business, where screams might go unnoticed, where evil could hide in plain sight. Davidson had surrounded himself with others who shared his criminal mindset. His half-brother, Letalvis Cobbins, had a felony conviction for attempted robbery in New York. George Thomas had his own criminal history. Eric Boyd would later be described as an accessory. And then there was Vanessa Coleman, the only woman in the group, 18 years old, whose journal entries would later reveal a disturbing detachment from the horror unfolding around her. On that Saturday evening in January, these 5 individuals would cross paths with Channon and Chris in a way that would change everything. The attack was sudden, brutal, calculated. Channon and Chris were standing by Channon's Toyota 4Runner in the apartment complex parking lot. They were in an embrace, one of those quiet, intimate moments couples share. They never saw it coming. Multiple attackers emerged, guns drawn, hands bound. Within seconds, both Channon and Chris were forced into the back seat of Shannon's own vehicle, their hands tied behind their backs with shoelaces and strips of fabric. The carjacking had begun, but this was no ordinary robbery. This was an abduction. They were driven to 2316 Chipman Street, Davidson's house. A witness who worked as a garbage truck driver arrived at work on Chipman Street around 12:30 a.m. on January 7th. He noticed the lights were on at Davidson's house, which seemed unusual for that time of night. He saw Channon's 4Runner parked outside. The vehicle drove slowly past him, and he noticed 4 black men inside, seemingly checking him out. He had no idea he was witnessing the final hours of 2 young lives. What happened inside that house is almost too horrific to speak aloud. Christopher Newsom was raped. He was sodomized with an object. Multiple attackers assaulted him while he was bound and helpless. But they weren't finished with him. They forced him to walk, barefoot, across rough terrain to a set of nearby railroad tracks. Imagine the terror, the cold ground beneath his feet, the certainty of what was coming. He was blindfolded with a bandana, gagged with a sock, his hands still bound behind his back, his feet tied together. And then they shot him, first in the neck, then in the back. He survived those initial shots. Can you imagine the agony? Before they fired the fatal shot. The gun's muzzle was pressed directly against his head, above his right ear, severing his brain stem instantly. But even death wasn't enough for these monsters. They wrapped Christopher's body in a comforter, doused him with gasoline, and set him on fire. His burned remains were discovered the next day, January 7th, by a railroad employee at 12:20 p.m. Meanwhile, back at the house on Chipman Street, Channon Christian was living through her own personal hell. She was held captive primarily in the north bedroom of Davidson's house. Prosecutors believe Vanessa Coleman held Channon at gunpoint while the male attackers murdered Christopher. When they returned, the torture intensified. Channon was gang-raped repeatedly over the course of many hours. The medical examiner would later testify that she endured extreme sexual assault, much more than a simple sexual assault. She was raped with objects. Her injuries were so severe that she sustained extensive hemorrhaging to her head and groin. Prosecutors believe she was tied to a chair and orally raped by Davidson and Cobbins. She was beaten, kicked in the groin, struck in the head repeatedly. Her body showed bruises and carpet burns across much of her skin, evidence that she fought, that she tried to resist, that she didn't go quietly into that dark night. According to Davidson's own confession, at some point during her captivity, Channon said, "I didn't want to die. Let that sink in." 5 words that echo across the years. 5 words that her family will never forget. She didn't want to die. But her captors had other plans. In an attempt to destroy DNA evidence, they poured bleach down her throat while she was still alive. They scrubbed her body, including her bleeding, battered genital area, with bleach. The chemical burns combined with her other injuries created a level of suffering that defies comprehension. Channon was then bound in a hog-tied fashion with curtains and strips of bedding. Her face was tightly covered with a small plastic trash bag. Her body was stuffed inside 5 large garbage bags and placed inside a residential trash can in the kitchen. The medical examiner testified that Channon Christian slowly suffocated to death. She was alive when they put her in that trash can. She was conscious, bound, unable to move, unable to breathe, dying inch by inch in complete darkness. She died somewhere between the afternoon of January 7th and the afternoon of January 8th, 2007. While Channon was suffocating to death in that kitchen trash can, Lemaricus Davidson left his house. He went to spend time with his girlfriend. He gave her Channon's personal items as gifts. He used Christopher's cell phone. He wore Christopher's shoes. He went on with his life, while two young people lay dead because of his actions. Wait, what? Yes, you heard that right. He was walking around in his victim's shoes, while that victim's girlfriend died a slow, agonizing death in a trash can. When Channon and Chris didn't show up at the party that Saturday night, their friends knew something was wrong. These were responsible young people. They didn't just vanish. Calls went unanswered. Text messages went unread. By late that night, around 11 p.m., two of Christopher's friends went to the apartment complex where the couple had been kidnapped. They found Christopher's truck still in the parking lot, but Channon's 4Runner was gone. The families began searching immediately. They called hospitals. They filed missing persons reports, but when they asked local law enforcement for help, they were told they would have to search themselves. Think about that. Two young people vanish without a trace, and the parents are told to handle it on their own. Channon's parents contacted her mobile phone provider and discovered her phone had last pinged off a cell tower on Cherry Street. Family and friends searched that area through the night. Between 1:30 and 2 a.m. on Monday, January 8th, they found Channon's abandoned Toyota 4Runner. The vehicle told a story of violation. The front seats had been pushed all the way back. Channon, at her height, couldn't have reached the pedals in that position. The floorboard was covered with mud, completely inconsistent with how Channon maintained her vehicle. Personal items were missing: her teddy bear, photographs, phone charger, iPod. Stickers she kept on the windows had been removed, and inside the vehicle police found a pack of Newport cigarettes. Neither Channon nor Chris smoked them. But there was something else: an envelope. And on that envelope were fingerprints that would crack the case wide open. The prints belonged to Lemaricus Davidson. The address tied to him? 316 Chipman Street, just 2 blocks from where Channon's vehicle was found. On January 9th, police went to Davidson's house. It was empty, abandoned. But inside the kitchen, stuffed inside a trash can, they found Channon Christian's body wrapped in 5 large garbage bags. The physical evidence was overwhelming. Davidson's fingerprints were on the trash bags. His fingerprints were on the box of garbage bags. DNA evidence told an even more damning story. Davidson's sperm was found in Channon's vagina and anus. Latalvis Cobbins's sperm was found in her mouth and on her clothing. Shell casings at the house matched the bullets that killed Christopher Newsom. A manhunt began for Davidson. On January 11th, acting on information from Eric Boyd, police found Davidson hiding in a vacant house. Inside, they discovered Christopher Newsom's size 9½ Nike shock shoes and .22 caliber revolver. Davidson was arrested and interrogated. He told 5 different stories, each one a lie, each one an attempt to minimize his role. He claimed he'd left the house and knew nothing about the crimes. Then he said Cobbins and Thomas showed up with 2 people in a vehicle, but he didn't want any part of it. He said he never went past the living room. He said he never raped Channon. But the evidence didn't lie. Thomas, Cobbins and Coleman were arrested in Lebanon, Kentucky on January 11th. Police found them viewing news coverage of the murders on a computer. They discovered Channon's purse, her cosmetic bag, her overnight bag, trophies from their crimes. Perhaps most disturbing was a journal recovered from Vanessa Coleman. An entry dated January 9th, the day Channon's body was discovered, read, "Last night was one of a kind. Let's talk about adventures. I had one hell of an adventure since I've been in the Big TN. It's a crazy world these days. But I love the fun adventures and lessons that I've learned. It's going to be a long, interesting year." An adventure. She called it an adventure. The trials began in 2009, and Knoxville was riveted. 5 defendants, 46 charges for most of them. Counts of felony murder, premeditated murder, especially aggravated robbery, especially aggravated kidnapping, aggravated rape and theft. Lemaricus Davidson's trial began in October 2009. The evidence presented was overwhelming and graphic. The medical examiner's testimony brought jury members to tears. Family members sobbed in the gallery. Even seasoned court reporters struggled to maintain their composure. The defense tried to paint Davidson as a secondary player, someone who was present but not the mastermind. But the prosecution methodically destroyed that narrative. The house was Davidson's. The fingerprints were Davidson's. The DNA was Davidson's. The victims died under Davidson's roof, and he did nothing to stop it. In fact, all evidence pointed to him as the ringleader, the orchestrator of this nightmare. On October 28, 2009, the jury found Lemaricus Davidson guilty on all major counts. Then came the sentencing phase. Would he get life in prison, or would he face Tennessee's ultimate punishment? The jury deliberated. On October 30, 2009, they returned with their decision, death. The jury unanimously recommended the death penalty on 4 capital charges, 2 counts of first-degree felony murder and 2 counts of premeditated first-degree murder. Judge Richard Baumgartner didn't mince words during sentencing. He called the case one of the most incredibly outrageous, cruel and inhumane cases this court has ever seen. He looked at Davidson and said, "There really is no sentence great enough to punish you for the conduct you have been convicted of." In June 2010, Davidson received an additional 80 years for other charges related to the murders, to be served consecutively to his death sentences. The other defendants received their punishments as well. Latalvis Cobbins, life without parole. George Thomas, life without parole. Vanessa Coleman, 53 years, later reduced to 35 on retrial. Eric Boyd, life in prison plus 90 years after being convicted in 2019. But Davidson was the only one to receive death, the only one deemed deserving of society's ultimate punishment. Do you think justice was served, or is the death penalty too merciful for someone who inflicted such prolonged suffering? Drop your thoughts in the comments. Since 2009, Lemaricus Davidson has been housed at Riverbend Maximum Security Institution in Nashville, Tennessee, the state's death row. Life on death row is a peculiar kind of torture in itself. 23 hours a day in a small cell, 1 hour for recreation, limited contact with the outside world. Every day the same, every day waiting for a date that may or may not come. But here's where the story takes an unexpected turn. Remember Judge Baumgartner, who sentenced Davidson? In March 2011, it was revealed that Baumgartner had been addicted to prescription pain medication during the trials. He'd been purchasing drugs from convicted felons. He was forced to resign and was ultimately disbarred. This revelation threw all the convictions into question. Initially, new trials were ordered for all defendants. Can you imagine? The victims' families had to face the possibility of reliving this nightmare all over again. But the Tennessee Supreme Court intervened. In May 2012, they overturned the order for Davidson's retrial, ruling that Baumgartner's misconduct outside the courtroom didn't necessarily affect the trial proceedings themselves. Davidson's conviction and death sentence stood. The Tennessee Supreme Court affirmed Davidson's conviction and death sentences again in 2016. As of 2025, Lemaricus Davidson remains on death row. He has no execution date. Tennessee uses lethal injection as its primary method of execution, though inmates can choose the electric chair if they prefer. Davidson continues to file appeals. In 2025, he challenged a new Tennessee law that gave the Attorney General more control over post-conviction capital cases. His motions have been denied. Meanwhile, the families of Channon Christian and Christopher Newsom continue to advocate for his execution. They attend every hearing. They make statements to the parole board whenever another defendant comes up for review. They've turned their grief into action, pushing for new laws to protect future victims. The Chris Newsom Act eliminated the 13th juror rule in Tennessee, preventing judges from overturning unanimous jury verdicts. The Channon Christian Act restricts defense attorneys from portraying victims in a negative light during trials. Their children's names live on. Scholarships have been established in their memory. A memorial stands where Davidson's house once stood. The house was demolished in 2008, and Waste Connections, a national garbage collection company, created a memorial dedicated to Channon and Christopher. But for Davidson, there's only waiting. Waiting in a 6-by-9-foot cell. Waiting for appeals to run out. Waiting for the day Tennessee decides to carry out his sentence. So here we are, nearly 2 decades after those horrific January nights in 2007, and we're left with the questions that true crime always forces us to confront. Was Lemaricus Davidson born evil, or was evil created in him? Then there's the racial component that swirled around this case from the beginning. Some claimed the media ignored the story because the victims were white and the perpetrators were black, that it didn't fit the narrative of white-on-black violence that dominates national coverage. Others argued the case received exactly the attention it deserved, and that trying to make it about race diminished the real victims, Channon and Christopher. Law enforcement was clear. There was no evidence this was a hate crime. These were criminals who happened upon 2 young people and committed unspeakable acts. The color of anyone's skin doesn't matter when we're talking about torture and murder. But perhaps the biggest question is this: what does justice truly look like? Lemaricus Davidson has been on death row for over 15 years. He'll likely be there for many more. Some would say this is justice, that he should suffer in that cell day after day with the knowledge of what he did, until the state finally executes him. Others would argue that the death penalty is barbaric, that we as a society shouldn't lower ourselves to the level of killers, that life without parole is punishment enough. So I'll ask you one final time, do you think justice has been served in this case? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. Let's have a real conversation about these difficult questions, because that's the only way we learn, grow, and maybe, just maybe, create a society where cases like this become impossible. If this video moved you, hit that like button. Subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss another deep dive into the cases that force us to confront the darkest aspects of humanity.